You've stayed curious this long. Don't stop now. The darkness still has more to show you. This is Paranormal M. Subscribe and stay in the shadows with us. The breathing in the hallway. During my senior year of high school, my dad had just moved into a new house after his divorce from my ex-stepmom. I had two younger siblings, my brother Alex and my sister Anna. Since I lived mostly with my mom back then and stayed on campus during my first college semester, I shared a room with Anna whenever I visited, and she was 9 years younger than me. Alex, 6 years younger, had his own room down the hall. The house layout was a little weird. The upstairs hallway came right off of the kitchen. Walking down it, the kids' bathroom was on the left, and Alex's room was on the right. And at the end, there was a small square with doors to Dad's room and our shared room sitting diagonally from each other. One night late in the summer before college started, I came home around 1:30 a.m. And after hanging out with my boyfriend, the house was dark and still. My dad's snoring drifted faintly from his room, and both kids' doors were closed. I tiptoed into our room. I tossed my phone onto the bed and went to the bathroom to get ready for bed. I shut the door, changed into pajamas, started brushing my teeth. A soft creak from the hallway caught my attention. The old wood floors always gave you away in that house. I figured Alex was up for a bathroom trip, so I called out, "Just a second." But before I reached for the doorknob, I froze, and there was breathing. Not the kind of sleepy, uneven breathing you'd expect from a kid. This was deep and slow and heavy, and it had weight, and it sounded adult. My dad's still snoring. It wasn't him. Alex didn't sound like that. And then came another creak farther down toward the kitchen. Heavy steps, like my stomach was dropping. An intruder, also my brain decided immediately. The back door in the kitchen slid open to the yard, and our fence wasn't hard to climb. Maybe one of the kids had left it unlocked earlier, and I knew I'd locked the front door when I got home, but I hadn't checked the back. The breathing came closer. The floorboards moaned softly with each step, and my hands trembled as I locked the bathroom door and held still, straining to hear. The breathing stopped right outside, and it was so close I could almost feel it pressing against the door. I crouched with my heart pounding so loudly it drowned everything else out. I peeked under the door, and there was no feet, no shadow, there was nothing. And suddenly, no sound at all, no breathing, no creaks, just silence. I waited and still nothing. Then, gripping my hairbrush like a weapon, I unlocked the door and threw it open. Hallway was empty. Ran to my room, snatched up my phone, and called my boyfriend, whispering frantically as I checked every room in the house. Alex was sound asleep, and Anna too, and the back door was locked, and my dad still snoring. The next morning, I told Dad everything. He could tell I was shaken, so he went around checking doors and windows. He even mentioned the alarm system, which apparently had been armed the whole night. It wasn't an intruder, but something had been there, and I knew what I'd heard. And for months after, I avoided sleeping in that house. And every time I visited, that hallway felt colder than the rest of the place, like it remembered me. The Letters in the Woods. About 20 years ago, my mom and dad were out walking through a forest somewhere in Northumberland. Or at least that's where my mom thinks it was. They'd gone there on a whim, following an old trail they'd found on a paper map, and this was before smartphones. The place had a strange stillness to it, and as they were chatting about how otherworldly it felt, my dad laughed and said, "If fairies were real, I'd bet they'd pick this spot to live." And only a few moments later he flinched hard and said it felt like somebody had pressed a burning coin against his lower back. Assuming it was just a wasp sting, he just asked Mom to have a look. But what she saw wasn't a sting, it was writing, clear capital letters forming out of the skin itself, and said, "Why?" Neither my parents are the superstitious type, so instead of panicking, they mostly stood there stunned and fascinated. Mom said it didn't look like a scratch or a welt because it was beneath the surface, like the letters were glowing faintly underneath the skin. There was even a diagonal mark cutting through the Y as if somebody had written it with intent. And I've teased Dad ever since for not going to a doctor to get it checked or photographed properly. He says at the time it didn't even occur to him, it just felt too strange to react rationally. The marks faded after about 3 days, though faint smudges of what looked like more letters appeared later, unreadable this time. And nothing similar has ever happened again. Mom still swears the forest felt off that day. No bird song, no wind, just silence. We do still have one blurry photo of his back that evening, and if he gives the okay, I'll share it. I just wanted to put this story out there. Maybe someone can make sense of what really happened. Flickering lights and unfinished goodbyes. Hi guys, I know this might sound a bit weird, but hear me out. I lost my mom back in November. Didn't actually find out till just a few days ago. My family's complicated, to say the least, and for a bit of context before the weird part, I do have 2 sisters, both of whom hadn't spoken to Mom in years. When Mom was found by the police, they accidentally contacted the wrong sister. The one who wasn't listed as next of kin, just a backup. And the sister has been cut off for ages because of a lot of messy stuff. Stealing and drugs and other things I won't get into. And anyway, she told the police she'd contact the rest of us, but didn't. Nearly a month passed before she said anything. By the time we were finally told, she'd already been in Mom's house rummaging through everything with some old family friend we barely remember. They tore the place apart, and by the time we arrived, all the valuable things were gone. And the sentimental ones, Mom's letters and ornaments and photo albums, were either broken or stuffed into trash bags, and my heart sank. And here's where it gets strange. While we were there, the main light in the living room began to flicker. Not just a little, but in this sharp, attention-grabbing way. Right when I was reading a will that we later found out was a fake one. And then the light stopped, and suddenly the hallway light started flickering instead, and the others said it had been doing that since they'd come up and going crazy, as they described it. I brushed it off at first, but when I went upstairs, the hallway light up there started doing the same thing. I noticed the loft hatch was slightly open, climbed up and found a box full of old photos. Mom's childhood teddy bear and a few keepsakes that still smelled faintly like her perfume. I brought them down quietly. When I went to the kitchen, the room where Mom had, passed, well, that light was flickering the most violently of all, almost like it was angry. When my sister started being nasty to me, it got worse, and none of the other lights ever flickered at the same time. It was always one after another, like something aware. And that night I convinced myself it was just faulty wiring. But the next morning, I called the coroner and found out Mom's body had been ready for release to a funeral home over 2 weeks. My sister had been ignoring their calls, and Mom had been waiting all the time alone. Later that day, after everybody else was gone, I went back to myself to say goodbye in the kitchen. Spoke to her out loud, and for the full 40 minutes I was there, every light in the house stayed completely still. Not a single flicker. My mom was a big believer in ghosts and the spiritual world, and she even took me on a ghost tour when I was little. Now I can't help but wonder, was that her trying to tell me she was angry with what had happened, or maybe just letting me know she knew I finally came back? Since I was 12, my parents had been divorced, sharing custody of my younger brother and me. I stayed with her mom during the week and spent weekends with her dad, and around the time I turned 15, Mom moved us again. This time to a quiet little cul-de-sac tucked beside a stretch of woods. It wasn't bad, actually. The air was clean, neighbors waved when you passed. House had that fresh paint smell of new beginnings. Still, every now and then, I'd get this strange sense that we weren't alone in there. like someone was watching from just out of sight, never constant, but sharp when it came, like invisible eyes pressing against the back of my neck. One afternoon, Mom was at work. It was just my brother and me at home. The day was bright and warm, the kind of weather that makes you forget about anything creepy. My best friend, let's call him CD, came over carrying his football. 3 of us hung out in the side yard, tossing the ball and joking around. And then CD threw a perfect spiral toward my brother, and I hit him square in the chest and dropped to the grass, and he didn't even flinch to catch it. "Dude, what are you doing?" I said. I was walking over to grab the ball, but my brother didn't answer. He was staring at the house, and his eyes were locked on something. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't speak, just lifted a shaky hand and pointed. First, I looked up at the roof, and there was nothing. Then I lowered my gaze a little, and my stomach dropped, and my brother and I froze in place. CD came over confused and said, "What the hell are you two staring at?" Neither of us answered, and I just pointed the same way my brother had. CD started to scoff, and "I don't see," and then he stopped, because he saw it too. There in the upstairs hallway window was a pale, solid white face, and small and childlike, staring right back at us. It didn't move and it didn't blink. And then we stood there for what felt like forever, maybe 2 full minutes, until the face slowly backed away into the darkness of the house and said, "You saw that, right?" "Yeah," CD muttered. The 3 of us just stared at each other, trying to process what had happened. Because I was apparently the dumbest of the group, or maybe just the most stubborn, I decided to go inside and check. Took a few deep breaths before I pushed open the front door. My brother and CD stayed in the porch, watching through the screen as I crept up the stairs. Hallway was empty. Bathroom, my room, Mom's room, all empty. Nothing disturbed, nothing out of place. No open windows, no footprints, no trace of anyone at all. When I came back down, my brother's face was pale as the one we'd seen. We didn't talk much after that. Before that day, I was already half a believer in the paranormal, and CD thought it was possible. Brother thought it was all nonsense. Whatever that thing was in the window, it made believers out of all of us. The Woman in the Reflection. I just recently moved out of a house I'd lived in for nearly 6 years. My family and I moved there when I was 13, sharing the place with a family friend whose parents had passed away not long before. For the most part, it was an ordinary house, a little creaky, a little cold. Nothing too strange happened. Just the usual flicker at the corner of your eye, or the sense that someone's behind you when no one is. The layout of the house was odd. From the living room couch, you could look straight through the narrow galley kitchen, down a long hallway that led to the back door. On the right was a small half-bath and a cramped laundry area. A few years after we'd settled in, I started noticing something, or someone, standing halfway down the hallway. That was whenever I caught her reflection on the black screen TV. Or probably black TV screen. It looked like a woman, young, maybe in her 20s, with long dark hair. It spilled down her shoulders. Her outline was faint but unmistakable, like a shadow with a shape. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I'd stare, glance back toward the hallway, and of course there'd be nothing. But every time I turned back to the TV, there she was again. I checked for hanging coats and, piles of laundry, or any weird play of light. Nothing ever explained it. And after a while, I just got used to her, and she never moved, never made a sound, just stood there frozen in time. I figured if she wasn't causing trouble, there was no reason to panic. No one else in my family mentioned anything, so I eventually chalked it up to imagination. Maybe the light, maybe fatigue, and that's what I told myself at least. A few months before we moved, I started dating my new boyfriend. He'd come over pretty often, but sometimes he'd even stay the night, and today we were trading ghost stories from childhood and laughing. That was until I began telling him about that house, Hadn't even gotten to the part about the reflection before he interrupted me with his eyes wide open. He said one night while getting a soda from the kitchen, he suddenly felt someone watching him. When he turned toward the TV, he saw a woman's shape standing in the hallway behind him. His voice got quiet as he described her. Long black hair, still shadowy, exactly as I remembered. He said she didn't move, but he could feel her presence. He saw her only, but that was enough. I felt my stomach drop because for years I'd wondered if I'd imagined it, but now someone else, somebody who hadn't even known my story, had seen her too. When I asked my dad later, he said he'd never seen a woman, but sometimes thought he saw movement in that hallway, almost like somebody pacing quietly out of sight. And to this day, my boyfriend and I are the only ones who ever saw her. No explanation, no logical reason, just a shadow of a young woman who'd never left that hallway. Maybe never could. The thing in the hallway. So a little bit of a backstory. Me and my significant other moved into our first house about 6 months ago. Everything was great. Quiet neighborhood, nice backyard and all that. But about 2 weeks ago, weird stuff started happening. It began with my son having bad dreams or nightmares, whatever you want to call them. And one morning I woke up and he wasn't in his room. Instead, I found him curled up on the hallway rug and asked why he wasn't in bed. He said something started shaking his bed in the middle of the night, and I figured it was just the train. We live next to the tracks, and the house rattles sometimes when one goes by. Then he started having the same dream over and over again. He said he woke up under his bed once, like he'd been pulled there. And that's when we really started paying attention. We noticed knocking sounds and no one was around, and sometimes we'd hear dragging noises across the floor even though nothing had moved. One afternoon, my significant other was on the couch while our son played with his blocks, and suddenly my son looked toward the corner of the room and shouted, "I see you." My partner asked who he was talking to, and he said, "The shadow in the corner." Fast forward to today, and, well, my sister-in-law came over to visit. We were chatting in the kitchen when a strange high-pitched beeping started. It wasn't the smoke detector, not the microwave, not even the phone. It just didn't belong, and we looked everywhere and couldn't find it. Then about 10 minutes later, we heard 3 slow knocks from the hallway, one every minute, and after that there was silence. Now my son refuses to sleep in his room, and he says the shadow man waits there when the light goes out. And honestly, I'm starting to believe him. Two knocks at dusk. I know from the title alone that you're probably not expecting this story to be particularly scary. And honestly, it wasn't the worst thing that's ever happened to me. But it's still eerie enough that I think it's worth telling. And I've had my fair share of haunted moments throughout my life. Different houses, different ages, and different towns. My dad's side of the family seems to carry a strange magnet for these things. I think it stretches back generations now. This particular incident was one of my own. It happened to my younger brother, Alex. They were nearby when it happened. At my dad's house, the hallway upstairs is narrow. The kid's bathroom is facing Alex's room directly. And Alex, your usual 14-year-old gremlin, was loud and sarcastic and always plotting new ways to annoy me and her sister Anna. And I'm assuming that feeding him after midnight wasn't a good idea either, if you're going to call him a gremlin, but anyway. One weekend I was 19 and I was staying there for a few months. I was in the bathroom and I was on TikTok, and Anna, who was 11, was in her shared room drawing. Alex was across the hall with his headset on, gaming as usual. Both doors were closed, and a couple minutes in I heard 2 soft knocks on the door. Just 2, because I didn't think much of it, and I said, "Hang on, I'm almost done." I called out, assuming somebody just needed the bathroom, but there was no reply, so I shrugged it off. And then, right as I was about to get up, it happened again. 2 knocks, same rhythm. But this time, lower down on the door, I think. Like really low, as if a little kid were standing there. Gave me pause, and I frowned and said, a bit sharper, "Alex, seriously, stop messing around. You can wait or just use the other bathroom." Still no answer. When I started washing my hands, my phone buzzed, and it was a Snapchat from Alex. "Why are you yelling?" I typed back, "Because you keep knocking like an idiot." He replied almost immediately, "I didn't knock. I haven't even left my chair." That made my stomach tighten a bit, so I texted, "Then was it Anna?" He said he didn't think so. I stepped out, giving his door a glare on my way to my room, and Anna was there lying on her stomach with her sketchbook and headphones in. When I asked if she'd been at the door, she looked genuinely annoyed. "I've been here the whole time." Now I was properly weirded out, and I went straight into Alex's room. He was mid-match, headset on, eyes glued to the screen. I could see the timer. The round had been going for almost 10 minutes now. Neither of them could have done it, and both of them were tall. Alex was already 6 feet at 14, Anna nearly my height at 11. So whoever knocked, the sound had come from maybe 3 feet off the floor. When I told Alex, he just took off one ear cup and said, "Yeah, I heard some knocking too. I thought it was you." We both went downstairs to ask Dad. He was half asleep on the couch watching some old movie. He hadn't moved from there in over an hour. Alex cracked a joke about me. "So many ghosts again." But when we went back upstairs, none of us said anything else. He went back to his room, and I sat in the living room pretending to scroll through my phone. But I couldn't shake the sound of those 2 soft knocks right at dusk. The door that wouldn't move. I have a 19-month-old daughter who's been coughing in her sleep for the last few nights. Daycare germs, she practically lives with a runny nose. At around 12:15 a.m., she woke up, so I suctioned her nose and I let her snuggle with me until she drifted back off. I put her back in her crib and I crawled into bed myself. At about 1:40 a.m., I woke up suddenly and I felt a tiny shift beside me. It's like someone brushing the blanket. And when she's in her bed, she sometimes slides off the edge and toddles toward the hallway. So that's what I assumed was happening. But to do that, she'd have to climb over my husband, who was fast asleep, and she's not exactly stealthy. Then I heard a few footsteps and saw what looked like a little silhouette near the cracked open door, as if it were trying to push it wider. And she can open doors, so that wouldn't be unusual. So, the door didn't actually move. It stayed open just a sliver, and I whispered, "Sweetie, where are you going?" There's no answer. The shape seemed to fade, and my stomach dropped. I got up with my heart pounding, and I went to her room. She was sound asleep in her crib, still tucked underneath her blanket. And she's definitely not capable of climbing out, much less putting herself back in. I stood there for a good minute trying to make sense of it. Then I went back to bed and sleep didn't come easy. Around 4 a.m., I felt the bed shift again. And this time, she was there beside me. Weirded out, I checked the baby camera. I could see myself earlier going in to check on her, and then around 3:35, my husband quietly getting her and bringing her into our bed. But nothing explains what happened before that. The figure at the door, the soft footsteps, and the door that wouldn't move. So here I am, typing this in the dark, a little bit freaked out and very much awake. Has anything like this ever happened to anyone else? The singing doll returns. My daughter once had this doll that could clap and sing whenever I heard it loud, like a tiny pop star with built-in batteries. That's most of them. also had a motion sensor, so yeah, basically an overachiever of creepy toys. When the batteries died, we tossed it on the top shelf in the dining room and forgot about it. Days passed. Kids couldn't reach that high anyway, and even if they could, they didn't know how to change batteries. So one lazy afternoon, out of nowhere, the doll starts clapping and singing again, and for a few seconds, there's silence. Okay, weird, but that night around 2 a.m., when we were just dozing off, it starts again. Full volume concert mode, and I nearly jumped out of bed, so I checked it. Clap at it, wave at it, and there's nothing, totally dead. I put it back on the shelf, I turn off the light, and I walk away. And there it goes again. That's it. I grab the doll, walk outside, and toss it into the trash bin. The next morning, guess what's sitting in the living room couch like its owns in the place? Excuse me. Guess what's sitting on the living room couch like it owns the place? Yep, the same damn doll. My kids were 3 and 4, and no way they dug through a full trash bin. I asked them, and they said no, and as I walk closer, the doll starts clapping again. Nope. I lit up the fireplace, tossed it in, and said goodbye forever. My daughter, dead serious, brings me to her pink teddy bear and says, "He's not my friend anymore." Throws it in too. Thick black smoke rolled up the wall. Had to open the windows. Evil doll gone, unfriendly teddy gone. My daughter still asks why I burned her doll, and I tell her the truth. It was haunted, sweetheart. The haunting of 7A Resort. And this story happened to one of my maternal cousins who still lives in southeast Texas, and ever since I was just a few months old until my early 20s, my mom's side of the family would hold reunions at a place called 7A. It's nestled in the quiet town of Wimberley, and those reunions eventually came to an end after the resort changed ownership. Out of curiosity, I checked the 7A website not long ago, and it looks completely different now. Almost unrecognizable compared to what it had been when our family gatherings ended nearly a decade ago. But one particular year stands out in my memory. It's because of something strange that happened to my cousin Spencer. He and I have always been pretty close, more like brothers and cousins. And he's always been a grounded, no-nonsense kind of guy, and that's really what he told me that still gives me chills. Or rather, why. Spencer said that one evening he was sitting outside the resort's old shuttered movie theater in the mock boarding house in Pioneer Town, a kind of Western-style replica built for guests to walk through. While he was there, he claimed he heard a series of knocks, always in sets of 3, coming from somewhere unseen. Then came the long, slow creak of what sounded like a door opening, though all the doors around him were firmly shut. When he walked past the resort's historical log cabin, he swore he heard the distant crack of gunfire and faint, indistinct voices arguing or calling out. Passing the old blacksmith's shop, he said the air filled with a metallic rhythm of hammering and footsteps. There was unmistakable sound of people working, even though he was completely alone. And everyone else in the family was back at the cabins, either napping, chatting, or cooking dinner. Now, I've known Spencer all my life, and he's married, a father of 2. Not the kind of man who hallucinates or exaggerates for attention. He's never touched LSD or high-THC marijuana, or any kind of mind-altering drug, and doesn't even drink more than a beer or 2. So whatever he heard that day, it wasn't the product of a foggy mind. As for what still lingers in the ghost town of 7A Resort, your guess is as good as mine. But when I think about what Spencer described, those knocks and those voices and steps, I just can't help but wonder if some echoes of the past still wandered the dusty streets of Pioneer Town. The Girl with the Blue Scarf. This was told by me by the guy who lived through it, and it was sometime in the early 2000s, maybe a year or two after 9/11. I never forgot it, and I think you'll see why. This guy moved to New York for a new job. He found this charming old brownstone apartment in Queens. It was owned by an elderly woman who lived nearby and wanted to rent it out again. She was kind and gentle, and she said that hadn't been ready to let anyone stay there for a while. But when she met him, she felt he'd be the right tenant. He moved in with a friend, a good buddy who was rarely home because of work trips that kept him away most of the time. Since his friend traveled so often, they agreed that he'd get the bedroom, and Guy would take the couch in the living room, and it was simple enough. The apartment still had a few leftover things. A woven basket by the closet and a pale blue scarf hanging by the door. The landlord said she thought she'd cleared everything out, but maybe missed a couple of things. A few weeks after moving in, the guy started noticing odd things. Like early one morning, half asleep, he heard the front door unlock, open and close, and then lock again. And whoever it was went straight into his friend's room and shut the door. And this started happening often. Somebody would come in late at night, go into the bedroom, and shut the door. Sometimes you'd hear the shower running or pots clinking in the kitchen. Just the kind of sounds you'd expect when a roommate is home. And we didn't think much of it, actually. He was figuring his traveling friend must have come home without mentioning it. And then one afternoon, while watching TV, he saw a young woman walk by the hallway mirror. And she was pretty, about his friend's age, and wore the same blue scarf. She smiled politely and went into the bedroom like she belonged there. He assumed that she was his friend's girlfriend, quiet, neat, and respectful. Nothing weird. But when his friend finally came home between trips, he realized something didn't add up. His friend was messy as hell, with dishes piled up and clothes everywhere. So one day he asked, half joking, "Man, your girlfriend's been cleaning up after you like a saint." The friend stares at him and says, "What girlfriend?" "You know, the one who stays here when you're gone. She has a key, right?" "I don't have a girlfriend," he said flatly. They both got uneasy, and to be safe, they changed the locks. And yet, a few weeks later, she was back. The door would unlock again, and the scarf would appear and disappear, then show up again, like neatly folded by that hallway. They'd hear someone showering, walking around lightly in the kitchen. When the guy finally called the old landlady to ask what she knew, her voice was trembling. She told him that years before, her daughter had lived in that apartment alone. She died around the time of 9/11, some kind of subway accident, she said. The scarf and the basket were her daughter's, and she thought she'd taken them when she cleaned out the place, but apparently she hadn't. The man moved out a few weeks later, and his friend never met the woman, but he believed the story, and the landlady said her daughter had moved that apartment more than anything. And maybe in some way she never really left.
A scary case from official files. When I was a teenager, I heard about this story, but I deemed it to be an urban legend at that time. However, 2 years ago, I read it again from an official document, so it should be true. At the beginning of the 20th century, a fat man traveled to Chengdu, a large city in western China. He was there to sell herbal medicines. After a few days, he had sold out all of his goods and prepared to have lunch before returning. In a small restaurant, a young guy sitting around struck a conversation with him. The young guy told him that they were fellow villagers, and he had seen the fat man before. After this meal, the young guy invited him to go to his home because it was so rare to meet a fellow villager. The fat man agreed because he had sold all of his products, and there was no need to go home immediately. At first, the fat man wanted to leave after several hours. But the young guy urged him to stay for several days because, in the young guy's words, it was so difficult to meet a fellow villager in this city. Thus, the fat man stayed for several days. After a few days, when the fat man was going to leave, the young man handed over a letter to him to ask the fat man to deliver it to a relative on the way home. The fat man agreed eagerly. A few days later, the fat man found the place of the relative of the young guy, but it was very late, and the fat man was reluctant to knock on the door then for the next day. At this moment, however, he heard a conversation begin in the house. The fat man was suspicious. Why is anybody up talking at this hour? He attempted to know what was being said. After a few seconds, this fat man hurried away and summoned the police immediately. What happened at that moment? In fact, the curiosity of the fat man had saved his life. That's because of the horrible conversation he heard is as given below. Why has that poor man not come yet? Don't worry, he will not be too long. All right, but I need to see this poor man now. I've heard that he is so fat that his body will be able to contain all we need, and that's great. After hearing the last sentence, this fat man sensed danger. He crept away and then opened that envelope in private. Troublingly, this letter described nothing but the name, occupation, home address, and other information regarding this fat man. And at this moment, this fat man realized that the fat man in the conversation must be himself. So he called the police, and the police arrested all the people in that house at once. So what happened exactly in this process? In fact, the young guy and his relatives were villains and drug dealers. They conducted their business in the following way. Firstly, the young guy sought a foreigner in Chengdu and selected one who was not very bright. Next, the young guy invited the person whom he had picked to go to his home so he could gather information about his target. Usually, the young guy preferred to choose those who were single and destitute. Thirdly, the young guy would ask the potential victim to deliver a letter on his way home, and the destination was the haunt of the accomplices. Finally, after learning the identity of that potential victim and ensuring there is no risk, the criminals would murder the victim and hide opium in his body, and this was how they smuggled their shipments of drugs safely, transporting them inside corpses that they claimed to be on their way to the funeral. I've heard my fair of similar stories, but not quite like that. Not paranormal, but I found it interesting. A Ghost Boy. This story is so famous in my hometown. In the 1970s or 80s, my hometown was rather underdeveloped. The industry was just launched, and most people still live in villages. One day, a boy was born in a family. At that time, it's sort of habitual that their parents should take the kid's birthday to ask for life from a fortune teller. So did this family. When the boy's parents arrived at the famous soothsayer's home, the soothsayer was reluctant to give any information. Such silence was not a good signal. The couple knew it immediately. Without any choice, they urged the soothsayer to illustrate what was the problem. After a long time, the sayer finally spoke something, and in his words, the life of the boy was very unstable. It means that his spirit did not fit his body very well because the spirit was too rampant. The only solution was to look after the boy carefully before his 12-year-old birthday. If the boy could grow up and cross that date, his spirit would be mild. Resultantly, the boy could avoid an early death. The couple was so worried but was given a life straw, and after returning home, the couple called up the parents both sides to let them know this. To look after the boy carefully, the 6 members of the family designed a duty sheet. The young couple had to carry out more jobs in the field, so the 4 seniors shared more efforts in looking after their grandson. No matter what happened, they must guarantee that the boy should be in one sight at least. The strategy seemed efficient. Although the boy had encountered a few hazards, a family member saved the boy quickly. After an intense period, everything seemed to return to the right track because the boy became more bright and knew to call his family to help him if he met something troubling. On the eve of Chinese New Year, the family had to collect some firewood and buy something for the forthcoming holiday. So all the members went out except for the grandmother of the boy. Perhaps the mother of the boy's father, and the woman was so cautious she kept the boy at home and closed all the windows and doors to avoid any potential danger. At that time, there were no cell phones or TV sets. And the old woman also felt tired, so she put the boy into her bed and went to sleep together. After a moment, the woman woke and realized she'd dreamed a strange dream. In this dream, she saw a group of kids in a forest. All kids looked anxious and nervous. One kid was screaming why the older brother had not returned yet. The others also echoed. The old woman was so curious and gazed at them continually. A few seconds later, the old woman saw a boy who was a bit older, and they were running toward the group. All kids surrounded and embraced the boy and asked him why he returned so late. He should come back in 1 or 2 years ago. The boy sighed and said that the family he lived with was so cautious. One family member monitored him day and night, so he had no chance to run away. But today was the eve of the new year. 5 members were out and only an old woman stayed. So the boy caught a chance. However, the boy complained that the old woman was so cautious that she had shut up all the other passages. The boy looked for a channel for a long time and finally escaped via water. Realizing this strange dream, the old woman felt something terrible and found the boy was not in the bed. The old woman got up instantly and rushed into the kitchen because there was only one place containing water, and as a result she saw the boy was in the water tank and died for a long time. The family noticed that the tank might be a potential problem, so removed it to a tall table so the boy could not climb to the tank unless he stepped on a chair. And I occasionally imagine what happened when the lady was sleeping, what the expression in the boy's face is. If there's any relation between the boy's death and the strange dream. Three urban legends occurring in Beijing. The first story. A few decades ago, a tailor managed to shop around the south gate of ancient Beijing city. This tailor was so skillful and friendly, so his shop was famous in Beijing. One day in the middle of the night, the tailor just went to bed, but someone was calling him at this time. The tailor asked the visitor what he wanted, while the visitor said he just wanted to buy some needles and string. The tailor was afraid that the visitor was probably a robber, so this tailor just opened a small window and handed the needles and strings out. And at this point, the tailor attempted to see the customer's face, but merely found there was a bracelet in the wrist of the customer. Afterwards, the customer paid and left, and the tailor also returned to his bed. The next day, some customers visited the tailor's shop and discussed a story. In their words, a culprit who had been beheaded disappeared last night for a while. Surprisingly, when the body of the culprit was found, his head and main body were seen together already. Also, the body was holding some needles and string. Some people distinguished that these needles and strings were sold by this tailor, so they came here to inquire of the tailor whether anything strange happened last night. This tailor dubitated and then came to see the body of the culprit. At first glance, the tailor saw his needles and strings, and then he saw there was the same bracelet he saw last night in the body's wrist. The tailor was out of his mind and then narrated what happened to his neighborhood, a doctor who owned a pharmacy. After hearing the scary story last night, the doctor was not surprised, but responded calmly, "My friend, it's not a big deal. Every month, a few poor guys would visit my pharmacy to buy some vulnerary at midnight." Or vulnerary. Vulnerary. as well as the man you met yesterday. Second story. If you ask me to name one of the most famous urban legends in China, I'd like to introduce this story at first, because almost everybody in China who was born after the 1980s has heard this story. I've read many different versions on the internet, and I'd like to select one which seems more reliable. In 1995, one night a bus was running to the suburb of Beijing, and the number of this bus was 375. Around the gate of a high school, a young man was waiting for this bus. That's because only this bus could take him home. When he found this bus, he started to wave his hands instantly. And after boarding this bus, the young man sat behind an old lady and found that there were 6 people on the bus, including himself, the driver, and the conductor. Quickly, the young man attempted to have a break because he was exhausted already. A few minutes later, the bus stopped again. 2 men got up. The young man glanced at the 2 men and found both of them were poker-faced. The 2 men did not talk, just sat down and kept silent. However, at this point, the old lady in front of the young man stood up suddenly and grabbed the young man tightly. "Nasty guy, how dare you try to steal my wallet?" This young man was confused, but responded, "I was sleeping just now and I never touched your wallet. Why are you trying to wrong me?" The old lady did not buy this, but asked the driver to stop the bus immediately. That's because there was a police station not far away from there. It seems that the driver was not interested in what happened, but stopped the bus to let the old lady and the young man leave this bus. After stepping out of this bus, this young man asked innocently, "Dear lady, I never touched your pocket. Why are you wronging me? I'm just a student." However, the response of this lady was so surprising. "Handsome boy, I've saved your life just now." The young man didn't understand, so the old lady continued to explain what happened and why she asked the driver to stop the bus. "Boy, have you noticed the 2 men who boarded the bus at last?" The young man nodded, and the old lady then continued. "When 2 went through me, I found something strange. Neither of them have feet. Do you understand? In other words, instead of stepping onto the bus, the 2 were floating just now. Therefore, I'm afraid they were not human beings. You know what I mean?" The young man was scared and was determined to report this to the police. Because there was a police station around there, the young man told the police what the old lady told him. But you can imagine the police couldn't believe the young man's words. However, at this time, the radio in the police station reported the news that a 375 bus went down a cliff not far away from there a few minutes ago, and there were 4 bodies on the bus, including the driver and the conductor. The third story. If you know something about China, I bet you must know a place named Babao Mountain. This mountain is famous because the graveyard of the top Chinese politicians is located in this place. And this story is about Babao Mountain Station. One day, a man worked so late then came off work at around 11:30 p.m. It's while the subway had stopped at this moment. This man's home was so remote that he wanted to have a try to get on the tube because calling a taxi was so expensive. To his surprise, there was a train that would drive in the direction of his house, and the man got on happily. After sitting down, this man felt something slightly strange. Generally, now it was around 12 a.m. while this train was full of people, and furthermore, these people seemed very tired and their clothes were worn out. Even so, this man was exhausted, and so he didn't think more. Because there would be an audio notification every station, he then closed his eyes and took a nap. A few minutes later, he heard an audio notification that this train had arrived at Babao Mountain Station, and he heard that many people got off. This man was so astonished why so many people got off here because this was not a significant station. But this man still closed his eyes and the train started to run. However, after a few minutes he heard an audio notification which reported this train had arrived at Babao Mountain Station. This man was shocked now because he remembered that he had heard the same message just before. In addition, he found nobody on this train now. He couldn't understand why he heard the report twice, and why so many people disappeared so soon. Stories of druids, witches, and friends, told by old cousins of mine. These are stories I heard as a child, but they were not told to me. These are not children's stories, is all I mean. They were told in gatherings of family and friends by various cousins of mine from Albania, most whom have long passed. Back when gatherings had dozens of people, and back when they would happen, back when nobody would be bothered by far relatives visiting. All of these stories take place in the northern mountains called the Accursed Mountains. Impenetrable and barren, which is where all the folks I mentioned would live before they would descend into the civilization of the fields south of there and end their tribal and pastoral life. I choose to believe these stories simply because they were serious topics being discussed by adults in the room, and I, as a child, couldn't help but listen in awe and fear. The first story, or how a relative met a satyr in the forest, or the devil as she thought. A relative of mine, probably around 80 at the time, I don't even remember my relation to her, interrupts a family feast as she asks all to listen. Us kids would sit at another table and play with her food. She speaks of how she met the cursed devil when she was a girl which had wandered far away from home, by playing and fooling around. It was late when she had learned of the fact that she was far away, and she had found herself in the exact place her mother would urge her not to be. A forest so thick it was called the Black Log. It said the light of the sun could barely be seen from within. It was all fine, though. She would return home. However, before that would happen, she decides to drink from a stream that would run quite a bit into the forest to quench a thirst. As she approaches, a thin man was crouched toward the stream, drinking. As she comes closer, she sees that his legs were crooked, hairy, and backwards, like that of a goat, and that he was wearing traditional folk clothes. All would be sort of like that back there. They're terrified, but with the strong spirit of a Highlander, she gathers heart and asks, "What are you?" The creature, greatly surprised that he's been spotted, says, "The cursed devil is what I am." And he carelessly jumps away, hitting trees and bushes like a dog which flees from rocks thrown at him. The second speaks of a fairy, but not the western kind. My grandmother gets quite lonely during the day, as all of us others go to work, which is why she gets excited when people sit around and listen to her talk. She asks me one day, as I'm running from the kitchen, well fed, toward my room, to come and have a chat. She's kind and sweet, and I'm obligated to listen. She speaks to me of her father, how he was a mason who built his own house by hand, how she loved him very much, and how she remembers him still after half a century. She quickly jumps into an occurrence his father had with some sort of a witch, and she says, she tells when her father was a boy, living in the mountains, as they all did. It was on a cold evening, while restless, too energetic to sleep, that he lies awake at bed and suddenly spots a faint light coming from his keyhole. The light enters through and floats toward the side of his bed, and as he pretends to be asleep, sees the light transform into a woman. He jumps out of his bed and grabs the quote-unquote witch by her throat while demanding answers. The witch explains that she's been sent there by her lodge, and as her rite of passage she would have to draw blood. The boy makes a deal, asks that his life be exchanged for that of his loyal dog, which is then butchered, drained of its blood, and buried the next day. The third, a real Western witch this time. This one comes from my great-grandfather, who spoke of this during a gathering. This was 2 decades ago, and he was still living in 90. When he was a young boy, he says, while gathering timber in the mountains, on a dark early morning, before the sun would come up, he would spot the most terrifying thing of his life. He said that above him, higher up in the mountain, there was a woman dressed in black, carrying a baby tied to her back. He, being surprised by this, raised his voice and yells, "And who are thee at this hour?" The woman, staring from behind her back, simply says, "No business of yours on who I am." And suddenly, the blink of an eye, the lad finds himself 50 meters away as if teleportation was a thing. The next morning, he went to the wise man of the village, who said that he was lucky not to have encountered a group of these people, but only one, as he would shortly have been dead otherwise. A lot of other stories I've heard, like how late night strangers would gather around trees and dance by the fire, or how shadows would play around the graves of loved ones, how snakes would defend a family's home, how wolves would never attack on Christmas, and much, much, much more. Grandma's voice. My grandma passed away last September. The creepy thing happened when my family and I went back for Thanksgiving. The Saturday after Thanksgiving, my dad asked to go over to my grandma's house with him to help look for some papers that are needed for the farm. He's digging through the closet in the basement, and I'm upstairs looking in the closet up there. But all of a sudden, we both hear my grandma yelling for help from her bedroom. We both drop what we're doing and run to the main floor of the house. We look at each other and we both nod to signal to the other that we both heard my grandma. We both then looked at the closed bedroom door and start stepping toward it. As my dad reaches out for the doorknob, we hear my grandma again, but much quieter, almost a whisper from the room. We look at each other again, gave a "fuck this" look, and sprinted out of that house. Turned away in the driveway, and I swear I could see my grandma sitting at the kitchen table just staring at us. My dad and I get back to his house after quickly leaving my grandma's house. I told him that we have to go back over there because I left some lights on upstairs and didn't shut the door on the top of the stairs. He agreed and said he didn't shut anything off in the basement. We pull up and park in front of the garage, and I come around the truck and I can see something moving in one of the windows. Before I can ask him, my dad says, "I saw that too, but I'm pretending I didn't." We go upstairs to turn off the lights because we don't want to go alone. But we notice all the lights are off and the door was shut and latched. I could accept the lights being off, but there's no way I could have forgotten. I shut and locked the door. It takes a good amount of effort to shut the door, not to mention the lock is a barrel lock. Requires you to spin and slide it to lock it. We ran to the basement and all the lights were off down there as well. And all the lights have the pull chain, and my dad swears he left all of them on. We get to the front door and hear my grandma again, but don't understand the words. My dad and I quickly walk to the truck and we notice a light on upstairs. I suggest we just leave the light on and just leave. He was already putting it to reverse as I said it. My dad and I never went back over to my grandma's house before I had to make my 7-hour drive home. My dad called me about a week and a half after Thanksgiving to tell what happened the following weekend after I had left. He and my brother went over there, still looking for those papers, and as they pulled up, all the lights were on in the house. They debated on even walking up to the door, let alone going inside. My dad really needed those papers to transfer the ownership of the property to himself, and he just wanted to get it done. My dad made my brother open the door, and when he opened it, they both could hear the old TV in the kitchen. They both walked into the kitchen and could smell a cigarette burning, but they couldn't see anyone. My dad turns the TV off, brother turns off a couple of lights, and they both decide the paper can wait, and they leave. My brother looks at the house as they pull away and sees all the lights off at the same time. And that's all they told me. I'll be going for a visit in a month or so. Might be a part 4 if anything else interesting happens while I'm there. I know you've been eagerly waiting to find out if anything has happened at my grandma's house. Well, here you go. I'm up visiting my family this weekend, and this happened at about 11 last night. I was watching a movie at my parents' house, and my phone started ringing. It was an aunt, and she asked if I would go over to Grandma's house with her. Guess they installed some motion detectors in the house, and she was getting notifications. I told her I'll be there, and I drove over. I pull up and see all the lights on upstairs, but no other lights in the house. My aunt pulls up a couple of minutes later, grabbed the bat I brought along that we had had inside, and we take one step in and we hear banging going upstairs. We hesitate, but know that we have to go check it out. She pushes me to go in first. We can now hear footsteps going back and forth. We make our way up the stairs, and the banging's getting louder with each step. I fling open the door, and the banging stops. We look around, and there's nothing. All the windows are locked, and the balcony door is still latched and locked as well. The only thing we found was the attic hatch was wide open. The ceilings are about 12 feet, and the only way to reach it is with a stepladder. The light was on in the attic space, and this light has a pull string and can't be turned on any other way. Turn off the lights except the attic one. My aunt starts down with the stairs first, and I'm about to start as well when I hear a voice coming from the attic. It either said hi or bye and didn't care either way. Start running down the stairs and outside, and we jump in our own vehicles, and my aunt leaves. I text my brother before I leave, and I look up at the upstairs of the house as I put my car in reverse. I can see the light in the attic through the little vent near the roof. I see it turn off as I start to get back up to turn around. I think last night was the last time I ever go to that house after dark. One happened to me, and the other happened to my brother. This happened to my brother about a month and a half ago, but he told me about it earlier today. So he was just leaving our parents' house around 7 p.m. or so after stopping to help my dad fix his lawnmower. Maybe a mile down the road when his phone started ringing. He looked at it, and it was my grandma's number. He answered it without thinking, and the other end of the line was silent. He decided to drive over to the house since it was pretty much on his way home. He didn't want to since it was after dark, but knew he shouldn't just in case somebody broke in or something. He pulled up, and he could see the light in the attic through the vent on the side of the house. It was turning off, and it was like somebody was continuously pulling the string on it. And just as he parked his truck, he remembered there's no power to the house. He still went up to the front door to make sure it was locked, and as he reached the knob, he heard a very loud bang not far into the house. He said, "Fuck this," left very quickly. Turned his truck around, and he saw the attic light turn off and stay off. 2. Earlier today, before my brother told me the story, my dad and I went over there so I could grab some wooden models my grandpa made a long time ago. We pull up and start walking to the house. I decided to look up at the second floor, and I saw someone or something looking out the window at us. My dad said he saw it too, and this window is pretty far above the landing on the stairs. In order to look out this window, you'd have to either be about 9 feet tall or standing on a ladder. We still went in and got these models, but we kept looking toward the stairs expecting to see something looking at us. I ended up taking more models than I intended and had to take multiple trips back into the house. I make sure not to look up at that window every time, just in case I'm still being watched by something. Theory on a popular Bengali folklore, the Sakchuni. A Sakchuni is a well-known spirit in Bengali folklore, often described as the ghost of a married woman who died before fulfilling her desires. She is said to wear a red or white saree with a shanka pola, a traditional Bengali bangle. They apparently haunt villages, especially targeting newlyweds or young women. But what if the stories we were told only scratched the surface? What if the truth is far worse? What if Shakchunis are not just restless spirits, but something far more ancient? Something that never truly belonged to this world in the first place? What if they aren't merely haunting the living out of regret, but are actively stealing life itself to reclaim their lost existence? Imagine this. The women who died tragically, whether by suicide, murder, or accidents, are merely the ones chosen to become shakchunis. But the transformation is not immediate. It's slow and painful, like being pulled from reality into something darker. At first, they appear normal, a grieving husband, a mourning family, they feel an eerie presence, but they dismiss it as sorrow playing tricks on their mind. Then, one night, she comes back. She stands in the doorway dressed in her wedding attire, her bangles clinking softly as she moves. The husband, paralyzed between fear and longing, calls out her name. She doesn't answer. Her face is shadowed, her features blurred as if she's not fully here. Then, as he steps closer, he sees it. Her face is not her own. Her skin shifts, her eyes, once familiar, become bottomless pits. Before he can scream, she whispers in a voice that's not hers. "You let me die, now I will live again." Then the screaming starts. The next morning, the husband is found, his face twisted in terror, his body ice cold as if something had drained him of warmth of life itself. And somewhere, in another village, a newlywed woman wakes up with a strange, unfamiliar hunger. What if a shakchuni is not just a ghost? What if she's a parasite hopping from one body to another, wearing them like a disguise? My family's ghosts. Stories that have been told by my family for 2 generations. As with most family stories, many of these have never been written, nor have these been shared outside of members of my family. To the best of my knowledge, these are true stories. For context, these occurred in Chicago during the late 20s and 30s. They were told by my grandmother. The Man on the Walkway. When I was young, maybe about 17, we're in the kitchen cleaning up after supper. Sitting near a window, I looked out and saw a man standing on the walkway. He had his face in his hands, and he would look up, and his face was covered in blood and horribly scarred. He looked up, then put his hands over his face several times. Called my mother, and when we looked out, he was gone. She said I must have been seeing things. Never saw this man again, and sometimes later my mother learned from the building superintendent that a man working, painting a window on the 3rd floor, he fell from his ladder and died instantly when he hit the ground. My mother told me about this a year or so later, thinking I was too young to understand. Validated to me what I experienced was indeed real. The child on a bike. One night, my friend and I finished our shift at the factory. It was very late. Late enough that we needed to walk home as the streetcars had stopped running for the day. Our walk was about 7 blocks from home, and it was a nice night, and the streetlights were bright enough for us not to be afraid of the dark. We had just walked about 3 blocks when we saw a young child riding his bike. He crossed from one side of the street to the other side. We were concerned because even though the streetlights were on, their light was not strong enough for him to see where he was going. We called out to the boy. They didn't pay much attention. Riding faster, he passed right in front of us into a wall of a building and disappeared. We learned later the paper reported a young boy was struck by a car near the location that we'd been walking at. The impact of the car was strong enough to throw the boy and the bike in the same wall that we witnessed. The young boy didn't survive. Ghost of the young girl. The ghost on the street, and this happened to be in the very early 20th century, had to reach way back for this one. My great-grandmother and her husband had just closed their restaurant and were headed home. And at that time in southern Illinois, they had just public outhouses every few blocks. These are a holdover from the 19th century, and my great-grandfather needed us to my grandfather needed to use the restroom, and he said that he would leave the door open a bit so he could make sure great-grandma would be okay. He was done taking care of his business when he saw a young woman walk past the door of the outhouse. He was somewhat upset as he had not finished dreeing when she walked by. He finished up and walked out to see this young woman turn into a breezeway. He followed. He was going to tell her how much that she startled him. He turned the corner and watched as she walked through a gate and disappeared. He went to the gate to open it and look, but this gate was rusted shut. But she was rather a thin girl and couldn't have opened the gate, and he tried as hard as he could and it wouldn't open. A day or two later, somebody asked if he had heard about the murder that happened. A young girl was killed when her boyfriend and man started fighting. She tried to break them up and stepped between them. One had pulled a knife, and rather than stab her boyfriend, the man stabbed her. She died in the hospital later, and the murder took place near the location of this outhouse. The old lady on the stairs. My grandmother was about 10 or 11 when she experienced this. She lived on the second floor of a 3 flat with her family. The building had very heavy steps leading to the top floor, which for some reason is very dark. Every so often, they could hear heavy footfalls of somebody going to the top floor and stop, but never heard the door open, and this happened a few times when her curiosity got the better of her. When she heard the steps, she walked into the hallway. She looked down and saw a woman dressed as if in mourning. She had a heavy black dress and a veil over her head and face. She hunched over as though she were very old, and the way she walked was odd. She would drag one foot up the stairs as she moved. She walked right past my grandma, brushing against her, and continued to the top floor when the footsteps ended. She told her mother what she had seen. Her mother told her that nobody lived on the upper floor for months, asked if she was sure about what she witnessed. Her mother asked some of the other tenants about it with what my grandma had seen. She was told the woman who had lived there died shortly after her husband had died. She came home from the funeral and walked to her flat, and no one saw her after that. She apparently died the following day. Since that time, people have heard her walking up the stairs. The flat has remained empty and locked ever since. As I said at the start, to my knowledge, these are all true stories.
The Night of the Unknown Words. A few nights ago, I came home from a small dinner with friends. I was slightly tipsy, but in a good mood. My mom was still awake, so I sat down with her in the kitchen to tell her about the evening. But midway through my story, a heavy wave of sleep hit me, like my brain just unplugged. I remember her laughing and saying, "Go to bed before you pass out right here." And that's the last thing I recall. This morning, though, she told me something that honestly gave me chills. Apparently, after I went to bed, she came into my room to take off my shoes. And as she did, I opened my eyes and I started talking. Not in English. She said my voice sounded lower, like I was whispering in some weird rhythmic language you never heard. She told me she froze for a second and gently said, "Honey, you're dreaming, go back to sleep." But I didn't stop. She kept saying I kept talking, slowly and chanting, and I suddenly sat up and said something like, "No, he's waiting, I have to go." I got out of bed, walked toward the door, and turned around and said, "It's too dark." And after that, I just went to the bathroom and came back to bed as if nothing had happened. Later that night, she said I woke her up again, standing beside her bed, muttering the same strange words, and she told me I didn't sound drunk or sleepy at all. "You were clear," she said, "but your words weren't from any language I know." The weirdest part is she reminded me that something similar happened when I was 16. Back then, I hadn't even touched alcohol. Honestly, I think it's just sleepwalking, maybe mixed with exhaustion and stress, but I can't lie. Hearing her tell it in a nervous voice this morning, it made me uneasy in a way I can't shake off. The Man by the Bakery. I grew up in a small village tucked between the hills of northern Italy. Around the early 2000s, we had 1,000 people living there. Everybody knew everyone, and I got my driver's license in late September 2013. By December, I was still a cautious driver. Winter nights are always foggy and the roads turned slick with frost. One evening, I'm driving back home from a friend's place when I reached the crossroads near the old bakery. About 2 minutes from my house, I noticed a man standing by the curb. Maybe he was in his 70s and waiting like he wanted to cross. So I slowed down and flashed my headlight, and headlights, not headlamp, to let him go. He just stood there staring, and I flashed again. Still nothing. I even gave him a small wave, but he didn't move, just kept looking at me, confused, so I muttered a few curses under my breath and drove off. When I got home, both my parents were in the kitchen having dinner. I joked about this strange old guy standing by the bakery in the freezing cold wearing light summer clothes like it was August. I was about to ask if Dad knew him, and he looked vaguely familiar, when my father slammed his fork down and shouted, "Oh, not you too!" And then he just got up and walked into the living room. Mom told me to stop talking and never bring it up again. A year later, I'd completely forgotten about it. One frosty December evening, I'm driving the same road with Mom in the passenger seat. As we approached the same crossroads, but from the opposite direction, there he was again. Same place, same light clothes, same stillness. I pointed him out, and Mom just sighed and said, "Yeah, don't slow down, he's not going to cross. He's been there for years." And when we got home, I asked what she meant. She said the man used to live in the village decades ago. He was the grandfather of one of Dad's old friends. Got hit by a car there in 1982. That was when there was no sidewalks and no streetlights. Just a narrow country road between two wheat fields. Mom said she first saw him in 1985, standing by the same spot. She even tried to let him cross, just like I did. When she told Dad, they had a massive argument because the man had already been dead for 3 years. We've both seen him several times since, and now whenever we pass by, we just nod or wave hello. Nothing scary or dramatic, but, well, something that makes you think, though. I guess that's what first got me curious about ghosts and things that linger. The shadow in the hallway. Can't quite pin down the year, but somewhere between 97 and 2000, I think. My memories blur a little around that time. But anyway, here's the thing. Our house was built in the late 1500s. Damn. Right after the manor across the street, so odd creaks, knocks, or shadows are nothing unusual for us. One evening, my mom told me to take a bath while she finished preparing dinner. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary, and I filled the tub and got in and watched her moving around the house. The bathroom door had a frosted glass panel. Not transparent, but you could still see shapes passing by, and I knew the difference between my mom's light and quick steps and my dad's heavier, slower ones. Mom walked past a few times, talking about something, probably school or dinner. As she went to the laundry room and the kitchen, right to left, then left to right, then again, but I noticed something strange. She went left to right once more, but I hadn't seen her go back the other way first. And her silhouette looked slightly wrong and slower and with shoulders hunched a little bit. Not the brisk stride my mom always had. Then from the other side of the door, the figure said, "Ready?" like asking if I was done with my bath. At that exact moment, I heard my mom's voice calling from the kitchen. She said, "What did he say?" Shape just paused, then stepped back toward the laundry room. A few seconds later, my real mom appeared, drying her hands with a towel, and she said she'd heard me talking to her. I'd only answered when I thought she spoke first, and I was maybe 9, so I didn't really think much of it. Mom brushed it off, saying that we always know when the other one needs us. She used to tell me we had a kind of connection, that we could call each other just by thinking, and to me as a kid that sounded magical. But now I wonder, what was that thing? A trick of the light, or a glitch in reality or spirit, or something that just wanted to look like my mom? The breathing in the corner. Back in 2008, my cousin and her husband rented a small apartment just a short walk from the house I shared with my mom. A couple of years later, they had a baby boy. He was born with some health complications, and eventually he was diagnosed as being on the spectrum and nonverbal. They lived there for years, but in 2015, the place started feeling too tight for them. And that's when I stepped in. I was hunting for a place of my own. My cousin suggested I take over the lease, and it's a good idea for both of us. I managed to pay everything off in less than a year, too. I moved in that summer and made it completely mine. Soft lamp-soled rugs, a mismatched sofa and centerpiece. A massive antique wardrobe I'd restored myself. It looked like something out of a period film, and for a while there at least, life was peaceful. Until it wasn't. In 2016, I started having sleep paralysis. I never saw shadow people or monsters, just the terrifying weight pressing down on my chest. And around the same time, lucid dreams became routine. I could control them sometimes, but often they controlled me, and then the noises began. It was a deep, rhythmic sound, like somebody sleeping and breathing heavily. And right next to the wardrobe. I owned 2 cats back then, and they were always up to, well, at least something. So at first I blamed them, but they never slept near that corner. I even tested the theory and shut them out of the room one night, and the breathing stayed. By early 2017, I couldn't take it anymore. I was convinced the wardrobe had brought something along with it, and I dismantled it and sold the doors and burned some parts, turned the base into a low bench for the living room. Breathing stopped after that, and I told myself it was all imagination, though sometimes little things would move or crack in strange ways. Then came Gigi, tiny black kitten I adopted in 2019. She'd never been outside a day in her life, but acted as though she'd seen ghosts her whole existence. She'd hide for hours, eyed wide, trembling over nothing. My other cats were chill, but Gigi, she was just basically born afraid. A lockdown came and went without incident. I was alone most of the time, just me and the cats. And for once, the apartment felt calm until 2022. I relocated abroad for work and left the cats under another cousin's care. Her teenage son eventually moved into the apartment since it was close to his university, and a few months later he called his mom one night, terrified. He'd been hearing that same breathing sound in the bedroom. His girlfriend said she never heard it, but he swore he could. And one night on his way to the bathroom, he saw her, a woman standing still in the hallway, smiling too widely. He said nothing, turned back and went to bed, and I have no idea how he managed that. Around the same time, Gigi's fear hit a new level. She started leaping onto impossible spots like top of the fridge and cupboards and even the curtain rod. Broke a few things trying to hide, and it was like she was running from someone only she could see. When I came back home at the end of 2023 to pretty much an empty place, I stayed there for a few weeks. One night I dreamt I was video calling my boyfriend from bed, and everything was the same as reality. My posture, the lighting, the hum of the fridge. Then, in the little preview box on my screen, I saw a woman behind me. Before I could react, she lunged. I instinctively grabbed her by the neck and slammed her down, and she vanished. I woke up breathless but proud, like I'd finally fought back. That night I decided to sleep in the living room, door closed. Cats are calm, even Gigi, which comforted me. Then came the sound. The loudest crash I've ever heard, like a cupboard full of metal pots exploding. And then the cats bolted. I rushed to the bedroom. Nothing had fallen, not a thing was out of place. My heart was hammering when my phone rang. It was my mom, and she said that she just had a bad feeling and wanted to check if I was okay. I grabbed the cats and left immediately. I returned a few times in daylight to finish packing, but never really slept there again. The apartment still sits empty, and I can't bring myself to photograph it for sale. People always say if it was haunted, you'd never stay there for years, but the truth is you do. You rationalize and you minimize. Oh, never mind. Minimize. You get used to the quiet between the strange, and funny enough, those were also my darkest years, and I was depressed and reckless and lost. And now, life is far from easy, but the air feels lighter, and I sometimes wonder if that thing, whatever it was, just stayed behind. The whispers beneath the floorboards. We moved to a new home 3 summers ago, and it felt like walking into a secret we weren't meant to know. The house had belonged to an elderly couple, long gone now, but somehow their presence lingered like perfume in the air, soft and haunting and strangely comforting. They began subtly, like doors sighed open by themselves, a faint sound of humming drifting down the hallway, and the piano, the piano. Play a single note and always the same one around midnight, like a gentle reminder that we're sharing a space. And at first I brushed it off as imagination or perhaps old pipes or loose floorboards, but over time I began to feel watched. Not in a threatening way, but like someone was curious about us and protective even. One rainy afternoon I invited a local spiritual reader, hoping to understand the odd serenity that filled our walls. She closed her eyes for a long moment and smiled faintly. "It's the woman who lived here before you," she said. "She loved this house deeply, and she stays because you care for it as she did." And that night I woke to a quiet melody, a music box. It was playing from the attic, and the sound floated down through the ceiling, light as a breath. I felt my heart race, and I crept upstairs, half expecting the melody to stop and open the door. But it didn't. The little wooden box, untouched for years, spinning slowly with its tiny ballerina twirling under the moonlight. My husband, ever the skeptic, refused to believe it until one evening as he climbed the stairs he froze. He later told me he'd felt somebody right behind him, the faintest rustle of skirts brushing the wall and the smell of lavender. "She followed me halfway up," he said. "Then she was gone." Our children have grown used to it, and sometimes they'll look up from their games and ask, "Did you call me?" when no one did, and other times they'll wave an empty corner, smiling at nothing I can see. I did experience sleep paralysis once. It was like this terrifying stillness where your body won't obey, but instead of fear, I felt calm. There was a man standing by the window wearing a brown cardigan looking out toward the garden. He turned slightly and met my eyes and nodded almost politely before fading into the dim morning light. And now we've learned to live together, us and them. The unseen and the breathing all sharing one roof. The floorboards still whisper at night and the piano still sighs, and somehow the house feels fuller for it, as though love once planted here refused to leave. The house that hummed. When I was little, we lived in this creaky old farmhouse that looked like it had been forgotten by time. Weird things happened there. Strange noises and doors that shut themselves, and shadows that didn't belong to anyone. I could probably write a book about it, but tonight I keep thinking about the time that I was touched by something I couldn't see. It didn't happen at that farmhouse, though. It was years later in the city. I was 16, staying with my dad at my grandmother's house. To understand what happened, you need to know a bit about her first. My grandmother was deeply religious, the kind who kept Bible verses taped to mirrors and little bottles of holy water in drawers. But her husband, my grandfather, was the opposite when he was young. He told me how he used to mock church and experiment with dark rituals and invite things he didn't understand. He said for years he couldn't sleep, and objects would fly across the room and his bed would shake. Whispers would crawl into his head. One night, when he thought he was going to die from fear, he said a blinding light filled his room and what he called a guardian angel. That's when he changed his life. But anyway, by the time I lived with Grandma, every doorway in that house had a wooden cross above it. Religious books stacked everywhere like bricks for protection. Still, the house felt wrong. Once my dad stormed to my room asking, "Why'd you call me?" I had headphones in, watching a video, and totally silent. He looked pale when I told him I hadn't said a word, and he swore he'd heard me call his name clearly, in my voice exactly. It happened again and again to other people, and we started calling it the mimic. If you've ever heard your own voice when no one's around, you know the chill. Then came the night that scared me most. Late October, a few days before Halloween. Standing in the kitchen doorway, talking with Grandma while she peeled pears for a pie. We're joking about old horror movies, like how the killer always hides behind the door, and suddenly, something shoved me hard in the back. It was so hard I nearly fell forward into the counter. No one was behind me, and I spun around so fast my heart was hammering, and Grandma froze, knife in midair, staring straight at me. "Did you see that?" I asked. She didn't answer, just looked blank for a moment and quietly went back to peeling as if nothing had happened. I stood there shaking. I wanted to believe my hoodie had snagged, or I just imagined it, but deep down, I think I knew better, and it felt deliberate. It's like something had decided to remind me it was there. Sometimes I wonder if it pushed me away from the cross hanging over the doorway, or maybe just wanted attention, but either way, that house never felt safe again, and I moved out not long after. If Grandpa's demons ever left him, I think they found a new home. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. Sweet dreams. See ya.
Welcome to the world of intrigue at Paranormal M, where we delve into stories that defy rational explanation. Subscribe and turn on notifications to be part of our journey through the extraordinary. Was this an angelic intervention? When I was 5 years old, my much older sister offered to walk me and my 6-year-old sister downtown. The walk from our house to the store with my 19-year-old sister, she was intent on taking us, and it wasn't very far. This I do recall. She made me and my 6-year-old sister hold hands as she walked ahead of us by a good way, since we were dawdling as young kids, as they do. The incident occurred when we walked in front of a garage that was very close to the street. As we approached the short driveway, it outbacks this long car. We didn't see it until it was approaching, without any indication that it would stop. And my 6-year-old sister says, "Lay down!" I was obedient, and neither of us screamed or yelled out to our eldest sister, while we immediately took a horizontal position. Kids who think they have a plan might just consider the whole thing adventurous. I don't know. I can still see the car rolling back, and just when the fender was at our chests, the car stopped. The driver opened the door and he walked to the back where we were lying on the cemented driveway. Half of each of our bodies visible. He simply gave instruction, me first, then my sister, to put out our hands above our heads, and he bent down and took both hands in his and gently lifted us both until we were standing upright behind his car. The whole ordeal was over in mere minutes, but enough time for our eldest sister to become aware that something was amiss, and she walked back to where we were all standing. Weirdly, the gentleman reached into his pocket and gave us each a quarter. We then set off on our way again after our eldest sister told us to say thank you to the man. I'm now 55 years old, but my partner in that odd happening will bring it up to this day, and we muse about what could have happened if we hadn't have stopped. Tragedy. And what reason could have been for him to have been alerted to 2 small little girls under his moving car? neither of us heard any loud voices or alarms, nor did our eldest sister, as she's since attested. Another strange thing about it is that I've always asked my sister, the 6-year-old at the time, where she even got that split-second idea of laying flat rather than running. She can't remember. If he'd had seen us when looking in his mirrors, he would never have put his car in reverse and stepped on the gas. What or who interceded that day? Glitch in the Matrix, Mandela Effect Story. So when I was younger, I had 2 of my aunts come into the country and staying with us over the summer. Can't remember what year it was. They were happy to be here, and I remember them teaching me how to play parcheesi, and after some time one of them left and another one stayed a while longer. So then I believe a year or so later, I go out of the country, and I'm there for a while. And then I'm visiting some cousins. My aunts are with me, and we're all having a good time. We decide to play board games. The games are going, and we're all playing chutes and ladders, checkers, etc. Then we decide to play parcheesi. Game's going, and after a while I'm winning, and one of my aunts says something along the lines of, "Hey, you're pretty good. Who taught you to play so well?" I smile and glance at her and say, "You taught me when you came that one time to the United States." Room gets quiet, and they go on to tell me that it couldn't have been her. They've never been there before. I assured them that they did, and to this day, apparently that never happened. I can't say it was a dream because I'm talking like in a span of a month. That's impossible. I can't recall any significant events on TV since it was summer vacation and everything was just reruns. And I never watched sports, so I don't know. Key things I remember was I did never see anything in the room in the basement. I just never went down there, and I don't really remember leaving the house. Million voices after untying a knot spell. This history was told to me by one of my aunts when we were talking about my grandma. My grandma died when I was 8, so I have not so memories or a clear image of how she was. So talking about her with my family kinda helps me. Well, apparently my grandma was interested in some kind of Santeria. She learned that from who knows while she was living in some random tiny town close to the Veracruz port. Years later from that, my grandma ended losing her wedding ring, so she ended sort of making like kind of a spell, where you were supposed to make some knots while praying I don't know what. It was a whole damn ritual. She was making knots while she was walking and praying around every corner of the house. So here she is walking around all the house, and she starts doing the same thing in the garden. And then I don't know how she found the ring outside on the grass. Then she kind of badly buried the cord with knots in her garden. Months passed after that, and my aunt, who likes gardening, was outside in the garden planting roses when she somehow found the cord. She told me that when she saw the cord, she thought that it could be a great idea to use that cord to tie some tree branches together. So she started to untie the knots and use the cord to tie the branches. Everything goes as normal, as usual. Then, that night, she told me that a few hours after she fell asleep, she'd got suddenly fucking awakened by a quote-unquote million voices whispering and murmuring next to her goddamn ear. So she wakes up scared and screaming to the voices for them to stop. The voices were all different, from male to female voices, all talking at the same time. Close, almost inside of her ear. My grandma woke up by her screams, and then she asked my aunt about what the fuck was going on, if she was having a nightmare or something. She told her about the million voices. Apparently, the million voices was enough for her to understand, asking her about everything that she did that day. She told her about the gardening and the cord. Then my grandma sort of just made my aunt some tea, and the next morning, she made her a whole cleansing ritual with herbs, eggs, and prayers. My grandma untied the branches and burned the cord while making another ritual. Honestly, I can't remember all the details about the ritual and what exactly my grandma did, but it seems like she asked something with the cord / not ritual. She asked, in parentheses, the other people to help her find this ring. And no, I have no idea what the other people means. Ghosts? Demons? I have no clue. But yeah, if you've heard something similar or know more about this not magic, that would be interesting to know. Thanks in advance. Ask Reddit. There was a kid I knew in grade school. This was in 6th grade. Anyway, we were both the kinds of kids who were really smart, but also terrible students. So we were in a special program in the mornings to make sure that we kept our grades up so we wouldn't get kicked out of our other stuff. One Friday morning, he explained to me how he liked the first part of the Pokemon because things were simple. He'd just play the first bit and reset his file over and over. I told him I liked the middle because it still felt like there was a lot to do, and that he should play through it with me. He reset his game again that day. It was a weird conversation, and I only realized that there was subtext much later in life. The next Monday, he wasn't there in the morning, but right after I left the room and I was in the hall, I ran into him. I asked where he was, since he was always there, and was basically the only friend I had there. We talked for a couple of minutes before the bell rang. I headed off to class, but he just kind of waited there. He seemed really, I don't know how to describe it, just off. Anyway, that night I get home, and my mom tells me that he's killed himself over the weekend. She worked with his mother, and since that we were friends, thought I should know. I tried to explain that wasn't possible since I'd just seen him at school. She thought I was just confused. I still wish he decided to play through damn Pokemon with me. My old apartment had a friendly ghost cat. In 2021, I was living in an apartment with a couple of friends. We had nothing weird happen for the first 9 months that we lived there. Then one day I'm in the kitchen doing dishes and generally cleaning stuff up. We had an open floor plan where you could see the kitchen from the living room. I walked over to our couch because I had just gone to the store earlier and bought some sponges. I had left the bag on the couch, and I needed a new one. I grabbed the sponges and I turned around to walk back to the kitchen. When right there on the counter, I see this little black shadow, cat-sized. I looked at it for a second when it appeared, and it jumped off the counter, moving a stack of plates I had on the counter. So it did make noise, and I heard the thud of it hitting the ground. I immediately walked to the kitchen, and there was nothing there and no place it could have gone. I checked the cabinets and everything, and there was nothing. I didn't get any bad vibes from it, and I didn't realize that it may have been a ghost of a cat till a few hours later when I was telling my roommates about it. I do have a dog, but he was asleep on the couch by the bag that I was getting the sponges from. That, and he's 70 pounds, so he would have definitely been visible and not just a little black blob. My dog is the only pet that we ever had in that apartment. The following week, one of my roommates and her boyfriend came up to me in the living room saying that they saw a ghost cat. Their room was upstairs, and the night before they were coming downstairs, so they flipped the light switch for the stairs. There at the bottom, they swear they saw a little black cat sitting at the bottom of the stairs, and it just disappeared. We ended up naming the cat, and the other roommate got some toys for it. I tried to ask it to come with me when we moved, but fortunately, I've never seen the ghost cat again, and I do hope it's doing okay. Ask Reddit. One night in my house out in the country around 1 a.m., I was doing some dishes. Over the sink in the kitchen is a window that overlooks a wooden patio in the backyard. And about 5 feet away from the sink and window is a large sliding glass door to get out onto said patio. The window over the kitchen was open, but the patio door was not. It was so dark outside. On the other side of the window screen was pure black. I had minimal lights on in the kitchen, but nevertheless, one could definitely see my head and face in the window looking from outside. I reflected on this thought in silence when directly ahead of me, at about 10 feet of distance, I hear a cell phone ring. I freeze and stare out into the blackness of the outdoors. The cell phone continues to ring, concealed in its distance from me, but clear in its closeness. It rang maybe 3 times before slowly I hear the creaking of the patio wood. One footstep, another footstep, crick, crack, crunk, then clunk, clunk, clunk down the steps of the patio, away from me and onto the grass of my backyard. I hear the soft but threatening footfalls on my lawn, and the cell phone ring grows fainter and more distant. Then, at what seems to be at the edge of the property, the cell phone is stifled mid-ring. Silence. Silence as I stare into nothing. A nothing that is not only probably staring back at me, but I suddenly realize with horror, had been staring at me for an hour without my knowing. Ask Reddit. My unexplained story involves an old dog who passed a few years ago. I adopted her from a shelter when she was already 10. She was there because her previous owner had passed unexpectedly. When I received her medical records, it was very clear that her previous owner had loved her very much and taken excellent care of her. Over my 6 or so years owning her, several spooky things happened that spanned different apartments and cities, but always when she was there. The most notable was when she and I were visiting my then boyfriend in a different town. We were all getting ready for bed, so all the lights had just been turned off, and I was nearing the patio door that opened to the parking lot. I bent over to pick something up, and I hear something whiz past my head, softly thunk against the glass, and rustle all the blinds. My immediate thought was that my boyfriend was messing with me and had thrown some balled-up socks at me. I stand up and prepare to tell him off a little bit, but the light coming from the parking lot, I can see he's frozen. His eyes are as big as saucers. He heard the same thing and saw the blinds start to move. So we turn the lights on to investigate and find no evidence of anything that could have made the noise, and nothing disturbed despite the still swinging blinds. I was about 7 feet from the door, and he and my little old gal were about 10 to 15 feet away. We never came up with an explanation, but I like to think the previous owner was keeping an eye out to make sure I was taking good care of her. Ask Reddit. Well, when I was 16, my family was temporarily staying at my aunt's house. This was while we transitioned from out of state to the area. My aunt lived in an old family house that had been part in our family for generations. The house was super old. Everything was made out of real wood and creaked like hell. Doors, windows, stairs, and floors. It was summertime, and me, being 16, was up around 2 a.m. in the living room chilling by myself on my laptop. All the lights were out because I didn't want to disturb anyone else in the house. The house had the basic main floor, upstairs, and basement. It was also an old row house in D.C., so you could just turn your head in either direction and see the entirety of the house. So it wasn't the largest of spaces. Well, anyway, I'm chilling, hanging out, super attentive to whatever the hell I was looking at my computer. I was laying on my tummy with my head in the direction of the front door in the stairwell that led upstairs. Then out of nowhere, I hear someone say my name from right behind me. I mean right behind me, as if someone was standing or sitting right behind me. The voice was crystal clear, not a muffle or anything. It sounded like a man's voice, although there were no men in the house. I also have an extremely unique name that isn't easily confused with other words. Instantly, I smiled, thinking it was one of my sisters or cousins playing a prank on me. I whipped my head around to catch whoever thought that maybe they were just being funny, and there was absolutely no one there. As I began to think of how someone could be pranking me, the humorous feeling I had quickly faded to terribly petrified. I realized I was the only one on the main floor. Everyone else was either upstairs in the bedrooms, or my mom was sleeping in the basement turned temporary room. I began thinking that the proximity the voice came from, literally right behind me, was too close for someone to sneak up behind me to not hear them approaching. Literally everything in this house creaked loud as hell. Literally impossible for someone to even tiptoe around without being heard. Before this moment, I was facing the staircase. So if anybody came downstairs from one of the upstairs bedrooms, I would have seen them. Within a matter of seconds, I hopped up and went off to the basement to join my mom as she slept. One of the most horrifying moments of my life. Never experienced anything remotely similar since. Thank God. Ask Reddit. This story is from a childhood friend who told me this, and it still unnerves me to this day. She was genuinely freaked out, and her family even backed up her claims, so here goes. Basically, my friend and her family moved into this rental property, which my friend said was haunted. It gave everyone an off feeling. Those who visited or stayed over would mention it for sure. I myself experienced this odd feeling of foreboding whenever I went over there, and believed in the, let's just say, consensus that the house was haunted. It honestly felt oppressive in that house, and you would feel this pitiful dread that was hard to compute into words and was extremely uncomfortable to experience, to say the least. Anyway, this particular inexplicable event, that is the basis of this post, was enough for my friend's family to pack up and stay with relatives until they moved out permanently. On this fateful afternoon, my friend had arrived back home from the park. and heard an argument taking place in the kitchen between her mom and dad. My friend thought this was odd, as both her parents should be at work, so she called out, "Mom," before unlocking the front door and going inside. My friend said the house fell instantly silent, an uncanny silence like all the air had been sucked out of the place and felt stifling and wrong. Then her mom says, "Hey, we're just in here." My friend was just outside the closed kitchen door at this point and froze beyond opening. It was her mother's voice, but there was something off, like the cadence was missing, that made it her mother. It sounded flat and unnatural. My friend decided to bolt back out the front door and wait outside until her brother came home, but she said as she turned back to the house, she saw her mother peering at her from the lounge room window. But it wasn't her mother. The face was the same, everything was the same, but her face was devoid of anything that made it her mother. There was no recognition on her mother's face. There was no indication that she was looking directly at her daughter. There was no emotion in the expression, nothing. The eyes looked unstaring and utterly blank. My friend screamed and ran down the street to her mother's work and confirmed that she was there all this time and had never been home. Initially, my friend's mother reasoned that someone must have broke in, but a later investigation proved nothing had been stolen and the back door was locked, as was the front door when my friend came home. No one could rationalize who my friend saw in that window and why it looked so much like her mother, but not fully human. So that was the deciding factor to nope the fuck out of there and find somewhere else to live. The landlord of the house denied anything like this happened when they lived there, but did admit tenants didn't stay long, saying that there was something quote-unquote wrong in the house. My friend also told me that she was the only one who actually saw anything definitively sinister in the house. But her family said they definitely felt an evil presence there, which ultimately manifested into the doppelganger experience my friend had. Utterly terrifying. How to get rid of a demon from a Ouija board. Let me start by saying I did not know what this Ouija board is until one of my girlfriends brought it into my room. I live in a women's shelter right now, so I'm close with everyone in my zone, so we all gathered to my room and one of my friends brought the damn thing over. We play and we play, but it doesn't last long because obviously everyone believes that at least someone is moving the damn thing, so we just continue playing other games. There were 5 of us. Once everyone leaves and I'm ready to go to bed, I turn off the lights and go to bed. My light switch is on. I don't care at first, it's a woman's shelter, so shit happens a lot and I'm just new to it. Whatever, I get up, I turn it off. I get back down on the bed and I hear a thud at my window. I don't believe in paranormal stuff, so I was kind of pooping myself at this point. The thud sounded kind of like somebody slammed themselves into the window. I got up, obviously turned the light on and opened the window. Nobody's there, so I close it and I go back to bed. All good. I wake up in the morning and straight away I hear something messing in my bathroom. The messing sounded just as if someone was moving stuff around and angrily fiddling with it. I was shitting myself. I left my room and called the bodyguard outside, and he locks and just looks in the bathroom. Nothing was there. Nothing was misplaced, and he was so nice about it, but I am very paranoid. My kid is about 1 month, so no way he can go into the room and start fiddling with shit. At this point, I'm up and awake, making food in the kitchen. And this is the point where I was like, Okay, let me search what this Ouija board shit is. I turn around and I see a shadow of some sort of a human-looking thing in the corner. It's diarrhea at this point in my pants. I look around and there's literally nothing that can make a shadow like this. It's a rainy, dark day, obviously. You're gonna see a shadow on this day. It doesn't really move, so I turn around and when I look back, it's gone. I'm staying at my friend's room for the time being, but I wanted to know how to get rid of it. And how do I make sure nobody else in my unit gets possessed? This is the single mom unit, so I don't want to potentially put kids in danger and recovering moms into more stress and fear. A bad feeling while at Domino's. I, a 21-year-old man, with my friend, a 21-year-old female, were out shopping stuff. She needed a mirror for her room, and it was night around 9 p.m. Shops usually start closing around that time in my area. We bought the mirror and were on our way back, but we decided to stop at Domino's for pizza. We were very hungry. The Domino's was located on a narrow alley, which was very sus according to me and my friend. On our way to the Domino's, had a small encounter with a man who got angry at me for not moving aside on the road so that way he could go on a scooter. The alley was narrow, but wide enough for a scooter to go around a person, even if they're close to the center of the road. He honked at me, but I wasn't paying attention. Then he yelled at me, and I was already far ahead when I turned towards him. By the time I heard him, he was easily able to go around and on his way, but he stayed there, yelling at me. When I turned to him, he asked me if I was deaf. I didn't like the tone, so I replied, saying that he could have just went around me if he wanted to, and there's so much space for him to go around me. He started yelling in his local language, which I couldn't understand. He went ahead and stopped at some point and turned back, and he was waiting for me to get near him so that way he could tell me, once again. My friend was walking ahead of me, so he didn't understand what had happened. When I reached near him, I asked if he didn't want to go now, as he was just waiting for me. He asked me where I was from, and I'm with my girlfriend, and asking if she was my girlfriend, pointing at her. I said I don't need to tell him shit, and asked him to be on his way. By that time, a car approached behind him and started honking at him as he was blocking its way. And then he did, in fact, go on his way. Me and my friend went inside Domino's, and she asked me what all this was all about, and I told her the whole thing. As we were waiting on our food to arrive, suddenly I have this very bad feeling inside of me. I just couldn't understand why. It felt like something bad was about to happen. And after a while, my friend turned to me and told me that she wasn't feeling good either. I told her I felt the same, and it really felt like something bad was around us. We didn't know why it was happening. We had our food, and as it was raining too, I held my bike keys in palm as if I were ready to punch someone if somebody jumped us. I was walking alongside my friend towards the parking where I parked my bike, and we were soaked in rain. We're only thinking about getting home as soon as possible. We never knew we had such a strong, bad feeling around that place, but it really felt like something bad was lurking around. The fact I felt that feeling and didn't let my friend know, and then she herself telling me that she feels the same, it sent chills down my body. Odd experience in Cornwall farmhouse. So first post here, as I've been doing some thinking after reading some of these, I wanted to share one of my own experiences that I'm unsure about. When I was younger, I lived in a cottage in an extremely rural part of Cornwall in the UK, until I was 10. I'm 22 now, and I had a horrifying encounter. To this day, I'm puzzled as to whether it was a dream or not. Basically, I was sleeping in the bottom bunk of a bunk bed. I'm an only child, but I like to change from time to time. I was trying to get to sleep, but I couldn't. Suddenly, I saw a dark figure poke its head over the top bunk, and it started staring at me intensely. I froze, my heart began to race. Seconds later, it threw what looked like a barrel at me, and I felt it hit my head, and I thrashed in my bed and hit the wall at the end. This is probably the most scared I've ever been in my life. I then jumped out of bed and ran to my parents' room down the corridor and could hear footsteps on the floorboards behind me chasing me. I could see stars from how hard I'd been hit. Like you know when you're about to pass out and your vision goes all blurry and fuzzy? Kinda like that. For years I've put this down as sleep paralysis or something along those lines, but recently I've been having doubts. I had so many other less intense experiences in that house that I have been wondering whether it was haunted. For example, I remember once my dog being extremely afraid to enter the living room of the house, and my mom, being very spiritual, asked a witch to douse the house. She told her no information, just that she wished for it to be cleansed. The lady stared at my mom and said, "Your dog is afraid. I can sense it. He is not going into that room, right?" We were shocked. How did she know this? She then explained after doing some investigating that there was a ghost of a large black cat who used to reside there, and my dog was quite afraid of them. And so it did make sense. Suffice to say, after her work was complete, my dog entered straight away and was content with being there for the rest of his days. The Latino community has very dark secrets connected to the supernatural world. Weeks ago, with some Latino friends, we talked about supernatural things through a podcast that we usually listen to while we have study groups at the university. Someone brought up the subject of strange inheritances left by relatives, in which a friend that we will call Gabriel spoke about how a sister from his grandmother, a practitioner of magic, he inherited a couple of books with very strange information from his mother. With some curiosity, we asked Gabriel to see if he could show us one. He reluctantly accepted. He warned us that it was probably not a good idea, saying that his mother had tried to kill them. But for strange reasons, the task was never achieved. Fire. Went out, throw them away, return to the living room library, give them away, return them the same day, and only explain that it was not knowledge that we should have. Even so, we pushed him to show it to us. I regret it. When he showed us one, it only seemed like a handmade book with the cover made of skin of an animal with grayish fur. I was the first one to dare to look at it, and I swear that just by taking it into my hands, fear and cold took over my body. It was quite thick. I just looked at the first few pages, and I must admit that I don't know exactly what I read. One of the pages explained in a very detailed way how to turn a house or farm animal into a black or white guardian, depending on your intentions. The next one was about secret uses of certain incredibly common flour in my country and Latin America. In general, the next page, God, it was terrible. It was an illustration of a grotesque baby-shaped creature, black skin, insect wings, and legs that, I don't know what they were, looked like two spider legs bent backwards. This thing was watching a child sleep from his crib. I know there was text underneath that drawing. I did not read it. I dropped the book. A terrible fear chilled my bones and left me trembling. I almost cried and began to pray in a hasty manner. I repeated a certain well-known Bible verse. Something in my mind told me that it was better not to touch that book or read it again. My mind simply blocked the image of the creature. I can try to describe it, but I can't visualize it. But I know that my mind blocked it for a higher reason. I have to admit that I investigated later, and it was worrying to know that many Latino families have stories with these heirlooms of rare books and objects. Even so, I want to know if you or know somebody else who has one of these books in their possession, one of these relics, and if possible, to talk about it. Lightning electricity person came out of my TV. My 32-year-old husband and I were up late tonight. I work nights from home. He was keeping me company, but has since gone to bed. I can't stop thinking about what happened and what it might have been. I couldn't find anything online, so I figured I'd come here. A few hours ago, we were watching some cringe YouTube videos about 90 Day Fiancé, our guilt pleasure show. And while work was slow, talking, and nothing really out of the ordinary, the living room TV is on the wall across the room from my desk, and the open concept kitchen is to my right. I can see the whole living room and kitchen in our apartment from where I'm sitting, and he could from where he was standing in between my desk and the TV. As we are watching a person talking on the very bland background, no fireworks or anything bright, there is a white, sparkly ball of light that appears out of the TV and silently zooms super fast through the air toward the kitchen. It stops at the far corner and materializes the dark outline of a tall person with white light sparkling around the edges facing us. I'd say a bit over 6 feet tall and a male or an androgynous build. Not really any curves and slim to average in build. It looked almost like it was spinning in that ball and landed on the balls of the feet like it had jumped from a height, slightly crouched with arms bent and a little outstretched for balance. It straightened up and disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. The crazy thing was that you could almost feel, or maybe the better word would be sense, in the air the very slight crackling or hair-raising effect that touching a staticky old TV would give you. Or maybe being outside during a thunderstorm right before lightning strikes nearby. We both saw the exact same thing at the same time, felt that same static charge in the air, and looked at each other and said, "Did you see that? What the fuck was that?" At the same time, I would 100% call an electrician or maintenance to check on the wiring or something, if not for the clear person shape. There was no storms or lightning outside either. I feel like a crazy person and wish I could have caught something on camera as proof. My paranormal experiences. When I was around 11 or 12 years old, I moved into a new home, which seems to be a tiny bit haunted. But yeah, anyways, sometime at night I had to come out of the shower and I left the bathroom. For some context, my brother's room is at the end of the hall. The bathroom is on the other side, so when you turn towards the end of the hall, leaving or entering the bathroom, you can see into my brother's room. As I was leaving, I saw a figure that I assumed to be my brother standing there. It spoke to me in a similar voice as well, but something was off about it. All the thing said was, "Hello there." It was odd, so I gave him a weird look and just responded with a confused hello back. I moved away from the door and headed towards the steps. When I turned back, it had went into the bathroom and shut the door behind it. I was just thinking, okay, whatever, he's weird, and went downstairs. Nobody passed me. No one was behind or in front of me. When I got to the basement to put my clothes in the basket, everybody was in the basement as well, including my brother, who was in the freezer looking for hot dogs, and he hadn't been in his room for a while, apparently. Later, I told my mom about the boy that I saw, and she told me that she had seen the balloon that was in the corner of the dining room get yanked down as though someone was pulling on it multiple times. She said she was able to communicate to it through the balloon. I don't remember exactly what she asked, but I do remember her telling it that it needed to leave. After that, the balloon didn't move any longer, although that's not the end of it. When I was home by myself later at night, I was eating at the dining room table when I heard the sound of someone running down the steps, then abruptly stopping. I looked over toward the direction of the stairs, and nobody was there. I was scared at the time and called my mom to ask when she would be home, which she said she would be soon, so I sat and watched TV until she did in fact get home. Another time I was home by myself. I was again eating at the dining room table when I thought I saw someone running in front of me in the kitchen, back and forth. It could have been my eyes playing a trick on me or something, but it still scared me at the time, so I went and sat outside for a little bit before going back inside and watching TV to distract myself. When I got older, things didn't seem to happen as much. Mostly just things like sounds of someone following me or tapping me while I'm alone. More recently, I was awoken to the feeling of being yanked out of my bed in the morning, which freaked me out especially even after I was fully awake. And seeing that there was nothing there, but I was still being pulled out of my bed. For some reason, I didn't scream. I pulled myself backwards quickly, and whatever had a hold of me finally let go. After that, I had these nightmares for a week of a woman coming from my closet or from the hallway. She would be dirty, pale, dressed in all white, and had long, messy, dark hair. She would come to my bedside and sit beside me, then put her face as close as she possibly could to mine. I would close my eyes, count to 5, open them, and she would be gone. I was able to move again, and I would simply go back to sleep each time until she finally stopped showing up. I'm not sure if it's related or if I was even dreaming. For more context, the way it started would be me waking up, seeing her standing there, walking towards me. All I had to do was close my eyes and count to 5. Then she would be gone. Another recent thing is when I was outside talking to my mom, we heard the sound of footsteps and something being dragged above us. The room above the porch is my room. We got up and ran to my room. Nothing had been touched, and no one was in there at all. My brother was in his room playing a game with his friends online, so it wasn't him either. Me and my mom went back downstairs. We continued to hear the sounds, and I still hear them sometimes at night, but I just ignore them now. I believe that is all. I may update if I forgot something or if anything new happens. When my stepmom passed away. So my mom was married to my dad for 13 years, ended in divorce, and until I was 21, she lived a very single life. Until she met Becca. She met her through a friend of her job and at the time and wasn't really interested in even meeting her, but she went ahead and did it for the sake of her friend and just ended up falling in absolute love with her. They were very much committed to each other for 5 years. The last 2 of them, Becca battled stage 3 lung cancer. After a year and a half, she was told her cancer would never be cured, but her tumors had shrunk to the point that they were almost gone, and the doctors decided to consider her in remission of sorts. but wanted her back in their offices every 6 months for follow-ups and check-ins. The next 6-month check-in, she found out one tumor had grown back, and just as big, if not bigger, than last time. She agreed to more treatments, but she wanted to see her dad in Texas before she did. While she was in Texas, her blood pressure became unmanageable. She landed in a hospital for a short time. She decided to refuse treatment and left against orders. She passed away that same night. She was more than my mom's partner. She was my mom. She was my children's Becca. She was our protector and a beloved family member. She and I have had hard conversations, and I know I couldn't have had with any other family member. She was that one person that you could tell. You could just tell it to him straight. The whole time she was with my mom, she would be the one to give me advice about my marriage and tell me how absolutely unhealthy it was for me and my kids. A couple of months after Becca passed, my husband announced to me that he had been in a relationship with another woman for 8 months and he no longer loved me, didn't want to be with me, and he was leaving. Part of me was relieved because I honestly didn't have the gall to leave, and I would have just dealt with it and gone on with my life. Probably would have just let him continue on. This is not how I am now, but part of me was dreading that part. I was going to have to live alone. I'd be raising my kids primarily alone, and I hadn't been without him, aside from a few brief breakups since I was 15. I didn't know how to be single. I stayed at my mom's a lot for the first few weeks after my split, even though I quickly got into my own, just rented a home. I just didn't want to be alone. So one day I was just having a horrible time. I was sad, crying all day. My kids were napping in the living room, 3 and 6. I was in my mom's bedroom doing my makeup, trying to stop crying, and I looked up at this picture of my mom and Becca on the mirror. I asked her, "Why didn't you stay? Are you okay? Where are you?" Of course, I knew I would get no answer. My world was rattled for about another 30 minutes later when I decided to give up on makeup, just go take a shower and try to just de-stress. My kids are the ultimate bathroom crashers, and they know no boundaries when I'm showering or if I'm on the toilet. Still to this day, and they're teens now. So I was in the shower and my younger daughter, who's 3 at the time, came into the bathroom and had a conversation with me. "Mama, I gotta tell you about a dream." Me, "Okay, baby, shoot." "You know that place that Becca likes to go and you can eat whatever you want?" Golden Corral. Me, "Yeah." "Well, I dreamed that Nani, Aunt R, and Uncle B and all of our friends were there eating dinner, and my Becca came in." Me, "That's awesome, baby." I try to go back to my shower as she continues poking her head into the shower. "Yeah, and she sat down next to me because I'm her favorite. She told me to tell you something, Mom." Me, "What'd she say?" "She said, tell your mama that I'm okay, she'll be okay, and I'm happy and I'm still here." I just started sobbing. She knew I needed her. She went through my 3-year-old to let me know that she was there and had my back. That's all I needed. Although I continued to struggle with my separation and everything in between, I no longer felt alone, and I'm forever grateful my daughter was able to relay that message to me. The radio station. In college, I had the entire basement to myself, and at this point, I had a beautiful black cat with green eyes named Tommy. I was getting ready for bed late, and I had a kind of basic black alarm clock / radio with a red digital clock on it where it can plug in or have batteries. But really, I don't think anybody uses batteries in those. Hint. There's a reason I'm pointing this out. As I was getting ready for bed, I rolled over to face the wall. Suddenly, the radio turns on. Not from my giant stereo, but the little alarm clock next to my bed. I half rolled over and thought it was probably Tommy somehow. So I called Tommy and told her it was her bedtime. She came running in from the bathroom at the foot of my bed. Of course, I'm thoroughly confused and roll over completely to look at my alarm clock. I tried turning it off, but it didn't work. I tried changing the station. That didn't even change it. I changed between AM and FM. Nothing seemed to change. I decided to unplug it, but it still wouldn't turn off. This is odd, but convenient. I always found a screwdriver pretty useful personally, so I kept one near my bed. As odd as that sounds, I like to play with technology, and my bed was where I'd do that. So I took my screwdriver and I opened the back for the batteries. Nothing. I couldn't turn this thing off or change the station, so I was staring at it thinking of what else to do because I've tried everything I could. While staring at it, I started to zone out in my focus on fixing the problem, and I listened to the station. And I started to realize the station, which is consistent the whole time, was not the station I always kept it on, 99.9 The Rock. Instead, I started to listen to what was going on. It was both intimidating and funny at the same time. They were telling stories on the radio. The lady I was listening to was talking about how she experienced something similar to something that I heard about in family experiencing. Except hers ended differently. She said she had a picture fall, and she'd pick it up, but it fell again. When she picked it up again, it had a crack on one person's face. Shortly after that person passed. Then I hear the radio host thank the person for their ghost story and tell them all the listeners to call in if they have any ghost stories. My mind was all over the place at that point. Do I call and tell them, "Hey, I've never heard your station in my life, and apparently I needed to hear it according to my haunted house because my radio wouldn't turn back off"? Would they even believe me? Another one of the things that I thought to myself, if this had happened to me, I wouldn't have been able to believe this happened because it just seemed so wild and hilarious, but also a little creepy because why it would turn to that at that particular story. What about any other story or any other day? Why then? Why with someone dying? The Pretenders. For some sense of understanding of this huge house and the layout, I lived in this house between high school and college, and had the basement to myself, with a mother-in-law's apartment basically. I had a bedroom, huge front room downstairs, kitchenette and bathroom. The previous owners had built a kennel to breed terriers around the corner in the hall from the stairs, just outside the door from the downstairs front room. At the bottom of the stairs where the portal was located, and there was another small room in there, some storage areas on one side of the stairs, and the garage was on the other direction of the kennels. Up at the top of the stairs was a door, and it locked from the upstairs. The upstairs had another large front room, a large kitchen, a dining area, dining room, large laundry room, 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. This house was from the 1940s, and it was sold to the government for $1 million to be demolished for a new development around 2012. We rented it for a long time when we moved from my home state. So unfortunately, we did not partake in the $1 million, but we were able to appreciate the space inside the house, as well as the size of the property and the privacy. The Pretenders. One evening in college, I was on the couch in the downstairs front room, alone of course. The front room was so large that you'd be able to see even a decent-sized TV. You'd still put the couch in the center in the front room. So there was plenty of space behind the couch. I always kept the downstairs front room door closed because of the portal and the kennels around the corner in the hall at the bottom of the stairs. and the door at the top of the stairs was also always closed. Everyone kept it closed, but that's how I'd come upstairs to the kitchen and whatnot. My kitchenette door was also always closed, and my bedroom door was too, if I was in there. This evening I was watching TV downstairs on the couch in my front room, all the doors closed with my pillow and blanket. I heard the door at the top of the stairs open and close, and then I heard my mom's footsteps coming down both flights of stairs and across the hall. When my mom thought I was sleeping, she would quietly touch the doorknob and try to quietly open it, which even if I was sleeping would automatically wake me up every time. I was not actually sleeping. I was wide awake. But I heard her quietly touch the doorknob and try to quietly turn it. Then, as usual, open it just barely and quietly whisper my name. It was the same as every other time. I didn't answer. Continued whispering my name repeatedly, thinking I was asleep, because I faked it. I distinctly even recall a Wendy's commercial followed by a George Lopez intro while this whole thing was happening, as weird as that is. I decided it would be better to listen to that in that moment for some reason. My mom whispered my name over and over, asking if I'm awake. She opened the door more. Then I heard her footsteps getting closer as she walked all the way through my giant front room. I don't mean just 12 feet long, I mean that there were at least 2 to 3 of the giant industrial long fluorescent lights in this house that lit up that front room. She repeated the same thing over and over until she got up behind the couch right above me, still asking if I'm awake. She repeated the same thing over and over. She eventually gave up though, and I heard her walking back out the front room. She didn't shut my front room door though. Pet peeve of mine everybody knew about. Not that anybody really came down. But something odd. Her footsteps stopped halfway up. Not that odd either. She probably was texting, or maybe she got stopped by something, or maybe sensed that I was awake and I was gonna get scared when I came, I don't know. I feigned a sleepy voice and said, "What?" "Nothing, Mom." Still no response. "Mom, I heard you. I'm up. What do you want?" But still, she didn't say anything. I just saw my door open. I was annoyed at her lack of response after such persistence and leaving my door open. I decided to get up and go see what she wanted, irritated with her. Although, as I started walking towards the door, my sort of irritation faded into anxiety and fear. But I kept reassuring myself, it's just her, I'll find her, it's just another time she's going to jump out and scare me. As I got out of the front room, I started to run up the stairs. I felt something come from the shadows of the kennel behind me, almost like something was going to grab my ankles. But this was par for the course. I hated that whole area, as did my gecko. I didn't like my front room downstairs, but I hated the hall down there and the stairs and the kennel more. I ran up the stairs as fast as I could. My mom wasn't there as I circled to the next flight and got to the top. I tried grabbing the door and turning the knob, but it wouldn't open. I started banging on the door and crying. I felt like something was with me, behind me, glaring at me. I sat there for what felt like forever. It was probably only minutes. Eventually, my family came to unlock the door. They were all laughing at my expense. I started yelling at them, telling them that it was not funny to lock me down there, knowing how terrified I am of it down there. And especially since I only came up because Mom was coming down and calling my name and leaving my front room door open. Everybody looked at me, and they told me that she had been with them the whole time, watching TV. I told them no, she came down and whispered my name. I heard her footsteps. They all told me with all sincerity that they had all been upstairs watching TV together repeatedly. I told them the full story, and they apologized for locking me down there and never did it again. I was extremely freaked out by the fact that not only did they know my name, or did it know my name, it knew exactly how to mimic my mom's footsteps, behavior, and it knew best how to get my attention. And not only like it felt like I was intentionally baited by it to go up the stairs, and then I started questioning what would have happened to me if I had responded to it when it pretended to be my mom. What would have happened if I hadn't pretended to be asleep that night? But also, was it just trying to scare me? Because it had an opportunity on the stairs. Why didn't it close the door when it left? Or continue back up the stairs? How did no one upstairs hear the door at the top of the stairs open or close? I've had all these questions all these years, and they're all still unanswered. The tickling. About 8 years ago, I was dead asleep. I woke up feeling my covers half pulled off of me, my light on, my shirt pulled up on my back facing the door, and feeling my back being tickled. My back arches when it's being tickled, but also I was the sleepiest I think I'd ever been in a long time. Like as if I had taken 5 Benadryl or something. Not that I have, I just felt like I had been hit by a tranquilizer. I was so sleepy. I woke up, saw my light on, felt a cold chill on my back, and felt like my back had been tickled. But I thought I was dreaming. I pulled my shirt back down, blankets back up, and was too tired to turn off the lights. So I just went back to bed. It happened again. Blankets pulled off, shirt on my back pulled up. I was cold and my back was colder. It felt like I was being tickled again. I really thought it was weird because no one was there. I pulled my shirt back down again and staying awake with my eyes closed slightly. Again, blanket rips off, shirt pulled up from my back, more tickling. This happened probably 10 times. Me fighting harder and harder each time to stay awake until finally the blankets were pulled off the bed. So I knew it really wasn't just me doing this in my sleep and imagining it anymore. I was partially still awake. I sat up, glared towards the door, and yelled, "Knock it off, I'm trying to sleep, leave me alone, go away." I haven't had that same issue again, which makes me feel bad. Later, my family told me a similar incident that occurred around the same time to my mom's husband. I lost my stepsister at age 8 to cancer, shortly before this event. Everyone used to tickle her back in the same manner. But of my biological siblings, my mom thinks that she felt closer to me, and that's why she felt sort of uncomfy. And she'd come talk to me because I was the oldest between our sisters. Also, I'm very ticklish on my back, and I'm a very light sleeper. So I'm assured that it just made it easier. I was initially writing it off as one of the other mischievous ghosts that we have always just was telling me about my family having the same thing around the same time. But I felt guilty ever since, in case she no longer felt safe to be near me in the afterlife.